Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring something that absolutely bridges the gap between home kitchen guesswork and professional culinary precision. We're looking at the math behind the meal. Because whether you're just trying to bake the perfect batch of chocolate chip cookies on a Sunday, or you're managing the inventory of a high-end restaurant, mastering kitchen math is the absolute secret ingredient to success. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever followed a recipe to the letter, but your supposedly soft chocolate chip cookies ended up turning out like literal rocks? Well, the culprit is almost always estimating. You see, baking is not very forgiving. It's a hard science. While you can easily get away with tossing in a handful of this or a pinch of that when you're cooking a savory dinner, even the absolute slightest miscalculation in a baking recipe can spell total disaster. So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer, taking us all the way from home kitchen basics right up to professional restaurant costing. We're going to cover the science of measuring, decoding conversions, yield percentage, edible portion costs, and finally, recipe costing and profit. Section 1. The science of measuring. Let's start at the very beginning, the micro level of the home kitchen. We have to look at the cardinal rules of measuring ingredients correctly because before we can even think about scaling a recipe up for a massive restaurant, we've got to get the baseline measurements exactly right. Now, a super common mistake is using the exact same tool for everything, but there is a crucial difference in design here. Liquid measuring cups have graduated lines. They're designed so you can pour liquids like milk or oil and read them perfectly at eye level without spilling over the edge. Dry measuring cups, on the other hand, hold a specific exact volume and have a completely flat edge. Using a liquid cup for flour? Yeah, that's a fast track to super dense cakes. Let's actually talk about flour for a second, because it is easily the most frequently mismeasured ingredient out there. You absolutely must use the spoon and level method. Never, and I mean never, just scoop your measuring cup directly into the flour bag. Scooping packs the flour down. It's honestly like packing a snowball, and you can easily end up with like 50% more flour than the recipe actually called for. Instead, just spoon it in lightly, do not tap the cup on the counter, and level it off with the flat back of a knife. But listen, if you want absolute foolproof precision, you really need a kitchen scale. You see, a standard measuring cup isn't always perfectly accurate. It totally depends on how you fill it. But a weight measurement? That never lies. 1 cup of all-purpose flour on a kitchen scale will always equal exactly 125 grams. It's simply the best way to guarantee consistent results every single time you bake. Section 2. Decoding kitchen conversions. Now that we know exactly how to measure our baseline, how do we translate those measurements when we need to scale recipes up or down? Well, this brilliantly illustrates how memorizing basic volume equivalents is just a vital tool for adjusting recipes on the fly without ruining the ratios. Knowing offhand that a quarter cup is exactly 4 tablespoons, or that a pint equals 16 fluid ounces, helps you rapidly multiply or cut down a recipe right in the middle of cooking. In professional kitchens, though, where precision is literally everything, chefs use something called the bridge method. This is a mathematical process of converting units by multiplying fractions to essentially cancel out the original unit. It's like a chain reaction. For example, if you need to convert 12 teaspoons into cups, you set up fractions to first cross out teaspoons to get tablespoons, and then you cross out tablespoons to get cups, eventually landing perfectly on 1/4 cup. It completely removes all the guesswork from scaling up delicate recipes. Section 3. Yield percentage explained. Okay. Let's step out of the home kitchen entirely now and into the professional macro level. We are going to look at ingredient yield. This is absolutely critical for making sure a restaurant doesn't run out of food or, frankly, run out of money. When you buy ingredients in bulk, you really have to understand that not every single ounce makes it to the final plate. This is the difference between as purchased quantity, or APQ, which is the raw weight straight from the vendor, and edible portion quantity, or EPQ. That EPQ is what you actually have left after cleaning, peeling, and prepping the food for the customer. The difference between those two numbers, that's called trim. It's the weight or volume of the waste. Think potato peels, carrot tops, or tough broccoli stems. Interestingly enough, an employee's skill level heavily dictates how much trim is actually created. A highly skilled prep cook will create significantly less waste than a beginner. And while meat trim, like fat and bones, can sometimes have financial value for making stocks, vegetable trim usually just goes straight in the bin. So, to determine how much of your purchase is actually usable, you have to calculate the yield percentage. Let me act as your friendly sous chef here for a second and walk you through the Culinary Institute of America's simple 3-step formula. First, identify your cleaned EPQ and your raw APQ. Second, make sure they are in the exact same unit, like pounds, for instance. Third, just divide your EPQ by your APQ and multiply by 100. So if 50 pounds of raw potatoes yields 42.5 pounds of peeled potatoes, your yield percentage is 85%. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, what's really interesting here is just how drastically usable weights vary between different ingredients when we look at data from the Culinary Institute of America. An artichoke has a yield of only 48%. That means over half of what you actually pay for goes right in the trash. Meanwhile, something like green beans has a fantastic 88% yield. Understanding these percentages is absolutely critical to placing an accurate food order. Section 4. Calculating edible portion costs. Now that we've got a handle on physical yield, we have to bridge that into the actual financial impact. This quote perfectly captures the restaurant mindset. Paying $1.08 for a bunch of uncleaned broccoli? Well, that's just your starting point. You aren't serving the tough stems and leaves to your customers, so your true cost must include the financial loss of that trim. If you only calculate your menu prices based on your as-purchased cost, you will severely underestimate your expenses. So let's demystify the math of finding the true cost of an ingredient on the plate. We're looking for the edible portion cost, or EPC. You take the cost you paid per unit and you simply divide it by the ingredient's yield percentage in decimal form. Going back to our $1.08 bunch of broccoli, let's say it weighs 1.5 pounds. That means it costs 72 cents a pound raw. But because it only has a 61% yield, you divide 72 cents by 0.61. The actual cost of the edible broccoli is $1.19 per pound. That ensures a chef never underestimates their true ingredient expenses. Section 5. Recipe, Costing, and Profit. All right, this brings us to the climax of our culinary math journey. We're taking all these measurements, all those conversions, and the yield costs, and we are applying them directly to a menu price. In the restaurant business, you generally aim for a target food cost percentage. Let's look at 22% as an example. If an appetizer has a 22% food cost, it means that exactly 22 cents of every dollar the customer pays goes directly to buying the ingredients. The other 78 cents, that's left over to cover labor, utilities, rent, and of course, the restaurant's actual profit. So the crucial point is how you actually set the menu price to hit that specific target. First, you add up the edible portion costs of every single ingredient to get your total recipe cost. Then, you divide that by the number of portions the recipe makes. Finally, divide that cost per portion by your desired food cost percentage. This exact three-step formula guarantees that a restaurant menu is actually profitable and not just delicious. To keep track of all this data, professionals use a food cost form, like the standard ones from the Culinary Institute of America. Think of this as the ultimate professional blueprint. This is where every single cup of flour, every gram of sugar, the bridge method conversions, and all those trim percentages come together in one place to secure a kitchen's bottom line. When we look at the big picture, we see that whether you are just trying to bake the perfect soft chocolate chip cookie at home, or you're running a massive high-end restaurant with strict margins, disciplined math is your absolute secret ingredient. It literally transforms the chaos of cooking into precise, repeatable success. It kind of makes you view a simple measuring cup in a whole new light, doesn't it? So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Next time you step into the kitchen to prepare a meal or bake a treat, will you just rely on amateur guesswork, or will you command the science of culinary math? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy cooking!